Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Family Matters Tonight. And tonight we have with us Anthony and Pat Usen. And they're going to be talking to us about the hand of God at work in their marriage. Now, Anthony and Pat have been married for 58 years. It's quite an achievement, really. And they've had some incredible experiences of God working in their lives together. So tonight we're going to hear some of their stories, from finding God and raising children to flying high and battling life-threatening illnesses. Ant and Pat have been through it all. We're going to hear how God worked in their lives and what brought them to where they are today. I thought as a reading to do, just before we start out, is from two readings, actually. The first one is from Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6. And I just thought these two readings that we're going to do really sum up what Ant and Pat are going to be talking about tonight. The first one says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him and he will direct your paths." And Romans 8 verse 28 says, "We know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." And I think that's what you want to show us tonight, isn't it, Anthony and Pat? And welcome to Family Matters.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes, indeed. And good evening, everyone.
It's
right.
Really good to have you both with us.
It's a real privilege. And in fact, I've been thinking in the many years that we have known you and that we've had interaction with you, and that has been quite a few now since you've spent time in New Zealand, there is much we haven't known about your background and your life. So thank you so much for sharing this with us tonight. And we've enjoyed our pre-discussions with you, and yeah, just found it really encouraging. So first of all, can you tell us how you met?
Yes, briefly, we met at a student party in Durban in January 1959, and we discovered, because we spent most of the evening talking to one another and ignoring everyone else, but we discovered that we were studying at the same campus in Pietermaritzburg, which is 80 kilometers inland from Durban, and that we were actually very close in the area where we were living and would be able to see each other once the new term opened. And once we got back to university at the beginning of the academic year, we pursued our relationship, and it blossomed over the next 4 years, and then we married in July 1962. So would you like to add to that, Mom?
I don't think there's really anything to add to that. It was, except to say that we were not in the truth at that stage, and so it was God's unguiding hand in the background that we were totally unaware of at the time.
Yes.
Can you share with us how that came about?
Well, I better give my side of the story first, because I wasn't brought up in the truth, didn't have the benefit of junior class or any background or Sunday school. I'm from an Anglican background, and I went to an Anglican boarding school, took confirmation classes, was confirmed as an Anglican, and knew next to nothing about what was in the Bible. So that was all very disappointing from the background point of view, because we had a lot of catching up to do.
Right now, from my point of view, I'm much the same as Anthony, although I didn't go to an Anglican school, confirmed and so on. And but what happened to me was that, well, not to me directly, but my father died when I was only 5, and subsequently my mother remarried, and he was a Christadelphian who was no longer attending. So although he used to poke fun at what I hadn't learned at Sunday school, he didn't discuss religion really with us. And then Alfred Norris came to South Africa, and he took my mom along, and she was bowled over and proceeded to be baptized within a year. I was 16 at that stage, so I then continued going to the lectures, but I wasn't overly excited about it. So by the time I went to university, I could tell Anthony about the truth, but neither of us were. In fact, I was just thinking today, I don't think we ever went to church together anywhere.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
So
All right,
only that was the beginning for me. And then subsequently, well, Anthony can tell the next bit, but we'll never get through this.
Yes, Pat was receiving Herbert W. Armstrong's Plain Truth magazine when we were first married in Maritzburg. And one of the issues had an interesting prophetic booklet in it, which I handed to Pat's stepfather, Ian Leask, and asked him whether there was any merit in the contents, because it predicted that the kingdom of God would be on earth in about 25 years' time. And I wondered whether there was any truth in this kind of approach. Well, he gave the booklet back to me about a week later and said, look, the prophetic section could have been written by a Christadelphian. That's exactly what we believe about the kingdom on the earth. But his doctrines are absolutely hopeless. If you want to know what the Bible contains, you need to take one of our scripture study courses. And he offered me one and sent it to me. And the first 12 lectures outlined the gospel perfectly. And that's all I needed. I understood exactly what he was saying, and we applied for baptism about a year after just short of a year after we were married. So interesting, Herbert Armstrong had a small part to play. And we were then into the Peter Maritzburg Ecclesia where we were living at the time. And I need to tell you some more about that in a moment.
Okay. So, well, yeah, tell us about that. What happened in that ecclesia? You had quite a deep end, thrown in the deep end, didn't you?
Yes, they did. They threw me in at the deep end.
6 months.
Within 6 months of being baptized, they had an annual general meeting, and there was only one nomination for recording brother at that meeting. They had obviously discussed this. They were all family members. I think to a man, it was a small ecclesia of about 20 members. And as far as we could tell, everybody was related either by blood or by marriage. And they just decided this is marvelous. We've got now 2 university people here. And what we're going to do is nominate him as the recording brother. Now, this is contrary to all good practice in the ecclesial world. We do understand that.
But you didn't know that.
But I didn't know that at the time, because I'd only been in the truth less than 6 months. And they passed that resolution at the AGM, appointed me the new recording brother, and handed me a little Bakelite suitcase, which was sort of a cardboard suitcase, which kids used to use. It was about 40 centimeters by 30, and the sort of things that kids would take their books and their lunch to school in those days. This was before the days of backpacks, which all the kids now use. And in that suitcase was the keys of the hall, the attendance register, the bank book, the correspondence. Everything related to that ecclesia had been stuffed into that suitcase, and they handed it to me and said, this is all you will need to run the ecclesia. It was a new approach on have suitcase, will travel. Now, have suitcase can administer any ecclesia. And, you know, we were less than 6 months in the truth, and we were absolutely shattered by what was expected of us, because we were supposed to open the hall, put out the chairs, cut the grass, see that everything was clean, make tick off the attendance register, take the collections, do the banking, the whole bit.
Wow.
And it was really shattering. But the thing that we decided was, look, this is what God has imposed upon us. We'll give it our best shot, and we'll work as a team, which we did. And it really did cement our marriage in the early stages. We hadn't been married that long, and it was really very good for us. So,
Okay, I was going to ask that. How did that affect your marriage? So you found that was a very a good thing for you. You found that really helpful.
Absolutely.
yes, we really did have to work as a team and pull together.
Yeah. And I think really and truly, when we were approached by you to do this talk, I said, Anthony said, well, you know, we've done so much in the truth. I said, this is not about the work in the truth. It's about the
Effect on our marriage.
it's our marriage. But in actual fact, we were so totally involved, that was part of our marriage in a way, because
Right.
we were,
Absolutely.
everything was hinged round that, to our benefit, I will say.
Yes.
There were ups and downs, of course, but yeah, but I mean, in those first 5 years, we just grew hugely because we had to.
Yeah.
We didn't have
Right.
enough.
Fortunately, Pat's brother Tom, who lived in Durban, decided he would transfer up to Pietermaritzburg because he had a Bachelor of Commerce degree, and he would help us with the finances, and he took that over. So that was quite a considerable assistance. And
So
the other,
he was baptized also.
oh yes, he had been baptized a couple of years
15.
earlier when he was 15. He was a keen student, and he was baptized early. And
Yes.
what we had to do then was we both worked in a bank during those 5 years, and that enabled us to work together very closely. We were at the same bank, and that helped a lot. One of the
Right.
things I found was really helpful was Paul's injunction to be given to hospitality, to open our home to people, because we had a lot of visiting speakers in South Africa. The Durban Ecclesia, which was 80 kilometers away, was a large meeting. They had about 160 members, and they had the money to invite 2 speakers a year, every year, to South Africa. And when they came to Maritzburg to spend a couple of nights with us, we had them in our home. And a lot of people in the Ecclesia were terrified of visiting speakers. They said, what will we talk to them about? You know, it's all too difficult. Will you have them? So we had them to stay year after year, and we benefited enormously by that little injunction to be given to hospitality. We thought it was absolutely wonderful having all these speakers through our home in those years.
Of course, we
Yeah.
had hospitality within the Ecclesia, but that was special because we learned so much from them, because they had stories to tell, or we could ask questions, and benefited hugely.
Right.
Yes.
So did you have children at this stage?
We
Period
had,
of 5 years?
we had 2 by the end of the 5 years, yes.
Yes, we did.
To talk about the legal bit there.
Yeah, and I ought to explain that although Pat did a BSc so she could teach biology, but I took 2 legal degrees at the university and was admitted as an attorney after completing my articles of clerkship. This was before we were baptized. And then I suddenly realized that that was not what I wanted to do as a Christadelphian. And I'll explain why if anybody's interested at the end. But I really felt that being an attorney was not the best thing for a Christadelphian because of the problems of the other members of the firm who were unbelievers being associated with those kind of people. And so we decided not to pursue that. And that's why I was working in a bank with Pat's brother, Tom. We were just able to do semi-legal work in the bank. We would do administration of estates, or sometimes income tax and that sort of thing, just lightweight legal work. We were both doing the same sort of thing. Yep.
Hmm.
Yeah. So after that, you moved to Durban.
Yes, because although I was qualified as an attorney but not willing to practice as one, the large firm in Durban, to which my father was one of the senior partners, they had a company associated with the firm which invested all their clients' money. And they said, we have to have a qualified attorney in charge of this company, which is an investment company. You don't have to practice law. We just want you to control the finances in this company. So it was a very good opportunity. It was a good job. And it meant that we could then join the Durban Ecclesia after 5 years in a small ecclesia and get exposure now to an ecclesia of 160 people, which really did benefit us enormously. We found it very helpful.
Okay.
Mm.
Yeah. We got involved in all the committees when I was in Pietermaritzburg in the small meeting. And once we got to Durban, they immediately co-opted us onto all the committees in the Durban meeting. So we just, but that was good for us too. And it helped. We learned an awful lot in a very short time.
Yeah. So what happened next?
What happened next?
There's something to do with Tom, wasn't there? Pat?
It wasn't long before he was assistant recording brother,
Yeah.
and then recording
right.
brother. Oh, that was quite a long time further
Yes, but yeah, my time in Pietermaritzburg certainly stood us in very good stead for the move to Durban. But what happened very soon after that was that Pat's brother Tom and his wife Leslie went up to Rhodesia to do mission work. And they left their 3 children with us. We had 3, they had 3, and they said, just look after them for a week while we're away. And we were happy to do that. They were doing God's work, and we were delighted to be of assistance. But on their way home, they were involved in a very serious motor accident, which put them in hospital and rehabilitation for the best part of 8 months.
Wow.
So what we took over for a week, we suddenly found we had on our hands for 8 months, 6 children under 4 as a responsibility. And that was a fearsome experience. It really did push our marriage. We had to pull together even more firmly, strongly than we had earlier on. But it did us a power of good. Would you like
And
to tell them?
were you still really heavily involved in the ecclesia at that time as well?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Period?
That didn't change.
No, that didn't change. That went on as usual, and we took the kids to the meetings and whatever. But 2 of them were just 4. The next 2 were 2.5, and the youngest 2 were 15 months and 11 months. And so it was a handful. But the older 2 got into kindy, as you call it, and which was a help for the mornings. The little ones had a sleep, so we only had 2 on our hands. So that made it a bit easier, but it was, I mean, we both had to be disciplinarians because there was no way we could handle 6 people, 6 littlies. One of the things that I found hardest was giving personal time to each child. It bothered me that I couldn't give them as much attention as they needed, but I did my best, and that's all I could do. Meals were chaotic. We in the mornings I sat all 6 children on the kitchen counter. I had one big bowl of porridge, and it just went one mouthful, another mouthful, another mouthful. And if they were crying or fighting, I ignored them and I went on to the next one. And so we just finished so that was breakfast. Lunchtime, they had sandwiches on the floor in the kitchen. And then at night, we fed the babies first. They went off to bed, and then we had attempted to have a family meal, which was, as you can imagine, with 2 4-year-olds and 2 2.5-year-olds. It was pretty
I
hectic.
can imagine.
By the way, 2 of them were girls and 4 were boys.
Okay.
We had to divide our house in half. We fortunately had a swing door which could be locked, and the other side of the swing door was our formal lounge and our study, and we kept that area tidy so we could receive guests. But the other half of the house was just chaotic, and we decided, well, we'll just let it deteriorate, and it can easily be repainted at the far end. So we survived that. But we need to tell you that the kind of support we received during those 8 months from members of the Ecclesia and the local, there were 2 Ecclesias in the Durban area at that time, and they both supported us magnificently. To tell.
Okay, so there were a lot of things that were done, but one brother, for instance, he had a whole lot of put together a whole lot of broken tricycles and put together, and they were weird tricycles, but nevertheless, all 4 older kids each had their own tricycle, and the younger 2 had those plastic push
Scooter things.
Yeah. Do you know the things I mean?
You could sit on them and you pedal them with your feet. Yeah.
Yes, you pedal with your feet on the floor. So that was fantastic, absolutely fantastic. There was a sister who took all the children out once a week for the afternoon, which was fantastic.
Wow.
It just, I never had to bake a cake or buy a biscuit because it just kept coming from brethren and sisters. Then at one stage, after my brother had come out of hospital, but my sister-in-law was still up there and she wanted to know about the children. Well, a few brethren and sisters got together and they paid for me to go up, and they arranged for 2 children to stay one place, 2 children another place, and 2 children another place. And I flew up for the weekend so that I could tell her about her children, which she really felt was helpful, and I certainly felt it was helpful to be able to see her, because we had been great friends. And yeah, so that but it just went on and on. I'm just trying to see what else I've got written down here.
One question I was going to ask was, you know, you said you carried on ecclesially, you know, with all the ecclesial events. Did you do readings and things at home? Did you do Bible stories at home?
Yeah, we did Bible stories with the children, but we did the Bible readings ourselves, and we tried to do them. We had a habit of doing the readings first thing in the morning. And we got up earlier so that we could get them done. Well, we tried to get them done before their kids woke up, so that we
lean forward.
We couldn't include them in that, but that we did read stories to them, and did our best.
Anthony, you were working full time over this time as well?
Yes, I was. But I managed. It wasn't easy.
No.
Yeah, no, we survived that period. But the thing we would like to get across to other people is that when support is needed like that to help out a family in distress, the one-off help that we're always willing to give when people ask us, it's got to be sustained month in, week out. And that's the lesson that we learned. We were really impressed with the people who were willing to help us over and over again. And I think that's something to pass on to everybody, that when support is needed, you might have to sustain it for a very long time. But that's part of our service in Christ. It needs to be continuous and well sustained. And we were really helped magnificently.
Of course, this doesn't mean we didn't appreciate one-off help, but certainly, and we had we had financial help. We had somebody produced 6 pairs of winter pajamas when winter came round. Somebody, other sisters got together and knitted 6 jerseys for the children. There were no fleeces in those days. And of course I had 2 nappies, which was and no such thing as disposable. So so that was quite a business. And what else did they do, Dad?
That's probably enough from that. Right.
Yeah. Nothing.
What else can we tell you about that? Or
yeah.
Next
and
question.
the other thing is that 2 sisters went to the market every week and pitched up with fruit and veg for us. So, you know, I mean, it was incredible, the help that was given. And that was every week.
Yeah, that's
even-
amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, no,
I think they received extra finance from other sisters, but nevertheless, the 2 of them did it regularly, and they asked us in particular what was helpful and what was not. So they didn't just sort of dump stuff with us that we couldn't use.
yeah, no, it was just wonderful. And
The support was phenomenal. It really was. I mean, there are lots of other things, but I think we'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Certainly it got the Ecclesia pulling together. The other thing that happened was, I mean, the prayers for the parents plus the prayers for us was phenomenal. And they even had an ecclesial prayer meeting, especially for my brother and his wife.
Oh, wow.
yeah. No, that
So-
was extreme. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us, Anthony, we believe you were about a year out of work at one stage. Can you tell us about that and your work afterwards, after that happened?
Yes, I was out of work for a stage. The job that I had as administering the company that was responsible for investing all the clients' money attached to this legal firm was sold. And so after I'd been there for about 4 or 5 years, a company in, I think it was Johannesburg, made a bid for the investment company, and the partners in the legal firm sold it. So I was without a job, and
Didn't want to do law.
I didn't want to practice law. And so I decided but they gave me a healthy bonus, which did tide us over for that year in between. And then a brother in the Durban meeting said, why don't you go and check out the posts that are vacant at the new university, which had been built in our suburb. It was a new Indian university because we were under the apartheid system in South Africa at that stage, but they'd built a new Indian university for Indian students. And they were searching for staff and finding it quite difficult to staff this particular university. So after a while, I thought, oh, I don't know that I want to be a university lecturer, but I better go and check out the vacancies. So I did that. Had a funny feeling one morning that I better just do this thing that the brother had suggested. And it happened to be the last day for applications before they were closed. So I put in my application very quickly on the last day and was called for an interview and got a senior lectureship in the law faculty, seeing that I was qualified as an attorney. They took me on and they asked me, they said, have you had any lecturing experience? So I said, well, not of the kind that you're thinking about, but often on a Sunday night on the platform at our church, I give lectures. Oh, they said, that's fine. As long as you know how to prepare and present material, that's all we're looking for at this stage. You'll soon get into the run of things in the law faculty. And that job then served me excellently for the next 25 years, very flexible. Really
Wow.
very interesting post, because in most universities, they have what they call publish or perish. You've got to justify the renewal of your contract at every year end. by the work that you've done during the year at that university. They didn't impose that on us at all in this new university. We got permanent tenure immediately, which I held for the best part of 25 years. I didn't have to renew my contract every year. It was a permanent appointment. And we weren't expected to do a whole lot of research either. They just left us to get on with it. And it was a wonderful job. Yep.
Okay.
Wow.
That sounds very, very wonderfully God provided.
And
It
it meant
was.
that he could do his preparation at home. So that meant that was a cementing factor in our marriage, because I saw much more of him.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time at home. I had a lovely study at home with a computer and everything, and could do all my preparation at home and spent very little time on campus.
Okay.
It also
That's great.
It also meant we could travel ecclesially during the many holidays that university students have. They seem to be endlessly on holiday, which is great from our point of view.
Yeah.
And I need to point out that ecclesias in South Africa were hundreds of kilometers apart in those days. There were only about a dozen ecclesias, and they were widely scattered around the country.
Not big.
And they were not big, they were small. Durban was by far the biggest ecclesia. Most other ecclesias were much smaller. And so we were able to travel around and meet our brothers and sisters in the South African Brotherhood, which was less than 500 in number in total. So it was a very useful period until we come to the next big step in our marriage.
Can you tell us, just before you go there, what you learned to fly?
Yes.
How did that come about?
That was interesting, because as a result of this dreadful accident that Tom and Leslie, that's Pat's brother and sister-in-law, were involved in, they got a hefty third-party insurance compensation payment. And for some reason, Tom looked up all the statistics. He was a BCom fella and he liked statistics, and he said, I found out that it's much safer to fly statistically than it is to drive by car. There are far more people killed on roads every year than there are in air accidents. So what he did was start a little aircraft company in Pietermaritzburg, where he lived. There was a small airport on the edge of the town, and he bought an aircraft, and he called it Mission Air. So we became missionaries. And I was able to do training at the weekends. And then later, when I got this university job, I was free in the afternoon. So I was very quickly trained as one of the pilots. And we were able to use that at weekends, flying up and down South Africa, dropping off speakers for weekend appointments. For example, we would start in Pietermaritzburg with 4 brethren in the plane and drop off one in East London, one in Port Elizabeth, and go on to Cape Town, do the appointments for the weekend, then fly back along the same route and pick them all up again and return them home on Sunday evening. So, you know, it was a marvelous service, and I really enjoyed the flying, of course. And we were able to visit farm people in the outback as well, which hardly ever got visitors. We were able to put down on, because it was a small plane, we could put down on farm strips without difficulty, and visited quite a number of the farmers as well.
Yeah.
And were you able to do this together? Or was
No.
this, no?
This is the part that Pat found really difficult, that I was away from home a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just found it very stressful because he was away so long and the family was young. They were, I suppose, 8 or 9, that sort of age. And I was left to handle everything on my own. And the training was in Pietermaritzburg, which meant that when Anthony went up to be trained, he not only had the training time, but he had the travel there. Plus, as I say, being away a large number of weekends. But we, and I, at times, not all the time, but I resented it at times because he was away so much. And I think it came to a head once when Rob had to go into hospital and I had to deal with that all by myself, and he broke his arm in 3 places. And I found that extremely stressful without Anthony's support. And so, but we resolved it by Anthony. We did most of the isolation trips as a family, and because it was a 4-seater, but our kids were little, we could sit 3 in the back. Excuse me. So we traveled as a family, and which was a good experience for the kids too.
Yeah.
So we went to visit people in isolation in various places, which they greatly benefited. I mean, one of them had an ecclesia of 6, another one had an ecclesia of 3 or 4, and others were just isolated on their own. So that was very beneficial. It was, it sort of overcame the problem of Anthony being away, because I then became involved and saw what it was like. And of course, the kids thought it was wonderful to be flying. And because they never did anything over the school holidays, because all the pilots were parents, we were given the use of the plane. We had to pay the petrol, but we didn't have to hire it. And we flew to see Anthony's parents, which were, 600 miles away.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for the kids to be flying
on holiday
was just something extraordinary.
But that is an important lesson for all marriages. Not when you're away a lot, for whatever reason, it might be for mission work or for preaching or away from home, it does put a stress on the marriage, and it needs to be discussed and thought through, and to minimize the difficulties for the wife and children. Yeah.
I think we also benefited by the fact that Anthony was at the university, so he was home in the afternoons.
Yeah.
So we had that. But I mean, for us, we worked as a team right throughout our marriage, and we still do.
Yeah, and
we try to.
Yeah, it does work.
So that was all travel through South Africa. Did you end up going overseas at all?
Yes, we did. It was a strange business, because after I'd been at the university for 6 years, they grant you what is known as a sabbatical, where you have time off in the following year, either 3 or 6 months, or even 12 if you've got a very busy schedule for study purposes. And what happened was that my mother and father, well, my father particularly, I think, was disappointed that I hadn't become an attorney and gone into the firm of which he was the senior partner, because it was a ready-made opening for me and I had turned it down. And so my parents said, we'll give you a couple of these cheap tickets to the UK so that you can see the world, travel, broaden your outlook, because we find that you're just so intensely involved in church matters generally. We think your focus is really altogether too, I don't quite know what the word I want here is. No, let me think. They did tell me what they thought about this. Yeah, too intense and focused on church work, and that it'll do you good to get out and see the world and come back with a more balanced view of life. That was there.
I'm sure you did that.
Oh, we thought this is wonderful. So we went off to the UK, and of course we knew, I don't know how many people, as a result of all the visitors that had been through South Africa, because you'll remember I told you Durban imported 2 speakers, usually from the UK, every year. So we had huge, wide exposure to many of the leading brethren from the UK, whom we then were able to visit. And in addition to that, we were offered a side trip by my parents. They said, would you like a side trip to Europe somewhere? And we said, no, we'd like Israel. So we went to Israel, which was wonderful. So we did all the things which just cemented our love of the work in the truth. And then a very strange thing happened. And I suppose I really ought to tell you this, because we were staying with Peter King. I'm sure many of you have probably met Peter King or know of him, because he used to come to South Africa regularly. He was a motor parts salesman and visited South Africa, so we knew him very well. And we were staying with him when we were in London, or just outside London, in Worcester. And he said, phone your children, see how they're getting on while you're away. And we said, oh, it's expensive, because there were no cell phones in those days. It was landlines only. But he insisted. So Pat phoned and got hold of our daughter. And she said, look, there's been a problem at this end. Dennis Gillett was speaking at the South African Bible School in that July of that year. And he's got tachycardia, which is a heart problem. And he's been told that he can't do any other talks when he gets home. He's got to rest up for quite a while. Well, we hadn't bothered to check into the South African Bible School, because Dennis was giving the same series at what is known as the Oxford Conference in the UK. So we thought, oh, well, we'll book into the conference and pick up the talks there and get to hear them anyway. And so Peter King, when he found out what had happened to Dennis, he phones this conference secretary and says, look, you've got a problem. One of your principal speakers for the conference has been hospitalized and had been told that he's not to do any speaking work for a number of months till he's fully recovered. And she started, the secretary was named Audrey Harrison, and she was wringing her hands and saying, well, what are we going to do? Because we'll never find another speaker in the short time with a series of 5 or 6 talks that can be given at short notice. What are we going to do? And Peter says, look, you don't have a problem. I've got somebody staying with us who nobody's ever heard. What they did to me then was they put me on the platform at Birmingham West the next Sunday, and there in the front row was all the Oxford Conference Committee checking me out. And I got the nod, and they said, okay, he can stand in for Dennis.
That was 2 weeks away.
And this is all very well, because we were on holiday in the UK. I didn't have any material with me which could have been presented at a conference. So I had to phone South Africa and get a sister we knew who lived nearby us to go around to the home, and told her which drawer it was in. Second drawer down on the left, you'll find all the notes in a bundle there. And she had to courier them across because there was no question of scanning and sending stuff over by computer in those days. Those facilities didn't exist. So I got my notes in time and gave the talks at the Oxford Conference, and it was had a most amazing effect, because there were people at that conference from all over the world. The Oxford Conference was quite well known in the early 80s, and people came from the UK, well, obviously from the UK, but they came from Canada and the USA, from Australia and New Zealand. There were international visitors from all parts of the British Commonwealth and the Western world. And they heard these talks, and they didn't say anything at the time, but 2 years later, I was given another air ticket back to the conference as a thank you for helping out. And just one after another, we got invitations to visit other countries and do a similar series of talks. So it just opened up the world of travel to us in the service of the Lord, which was totally unexpected. I mean, we'd gone to England to broaden our outlook and get away from this intensive a church attitude which we had manifested back in South Africa. And it turned out that it just opened doors which were absolutely fantastic. And by the time we came to Australia, to give you an idea, we'd had 40 overseas trips, all for very short periods, but a huge amount of travel we had been able to do in the ecclesial world as a result.
Wow.
Of Dennis being unwell and God opening a door which was totally unexpected. It was truly remarkable.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
We went to Canada and America, the States, several times. We went to the UK several times. We went to Germany. We went to Mauritius. We went to Sri Lanka. Well,
Yes, Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka,
We've
New
been
Zealand.
to India,
um,
Mauritius, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
India. There may have been one or two others, but anyway, I will say that the 40 included personal trips when we went to see Rob and Rochelle and the family.
Oh, yeah.
But by far the majority were invitations, and all those invitations included me. So we went as a team.
Yeah, that was
Lovely.
lovely. It was
Yeah.
just fantastic. Opened a door. We said, well, this is an opportunity. Better jump in and see what it brings. And it brought fantastic results, both for us and for others, we hope.
That's
Um,
wonderful.
Right.
Our time is getting is nearly up, but we really do need to touch on
Leukemia.
Yeah.
Pat's illness and and that remarkable journey and how it
Yeah,
affected you.
I'll set the ball rolling with that because it was in 1988 that she was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia. So that meant I was likely to be a widow at 48, going by the statistics. And we checked up on the likely course of this illness, and they said, you know, it's really, you've got a less than 10% chance of survival. The reason being, quickly to give you the statistics, that 20% of people don't respond to chemotherapy. She did. Of the 80% that respond, only about 25% have got any hope of finding a bone marrow donor that's compatible, because there was no bone marrow register in those days. It was early times.
Very early.
Right.
And if you do find a bone marrow donor, you've got a 60% chance of surviving the process. So we did all those stats and it came down to less than 10% chance of Pat surviving the illness.
Wow.
And to give you an idea of how serious the illness was, the hematologist, who was a Jewish fellow and very well qualified, had 18 other patients on his books with the same complaint when Pat was diagnosed, and within 18 months, all of them had died. Pat is
Right.
still with us 30 years later. So it was an
And we're glad.
incredible thing that she survived that procedure.
Of course, it cemented our marriage fantastically, because I was totally dependent on Anthony, and Anthony was very supportive. I mean, didn't know that he had it in him at that stage. It was, you know, it was fantastic, and we learned so many lessons from it. I mean, the details, every step of the way, God was guiding us. I mean, we had one instance where Anthony had prayed for healing when I had the original chemo before I had the transplant, and I went into remission. So Anthony's answer was that the Lord has healed you, no transplant. My reaction was they offered it to me, and I said, if God's given me that opportunity, I want to do it. Well, that was I mean, it wasn't a nasty conflict, but it was a conflict of opinion. But we then found out the leukemia had returned, so it solved the problem.
Okay.
Mm.
So she had the transplant. She was able to find 2 donors from amongst her brothers that were compatible, which is very unusual. Both her brothers could have helped her. One of them
Okay.
did. And she got the bone marrow transplant. It took months in the intensive care unit up in Johannesburg. She had to have the transplant 500 miles away from where we lived. But it worked.
And again, the support.
The support was incredible from the Ecclesias.
Phenomenal. My
Yeah.
cousin looked after Anthony when he came up to visit. She looked after me when I came out of hospital, but still had to go every couple of days into the hospital. And she was just phenomenal, and her husband very supportive too. And it was tough for her because I was so pathetic and weak. But she did a fantastic job. She got a new car, and she kept her old car, and
Made it available.
made it available to Anthony so that he could drive back and forth to the hospital.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Which was phenomenal, really. And yes, that was one of the helps. There were so many ways in which people helped. Even before I had the transplant, I had one of my best friends that I'd made, who'd come out to South Africa to work. She was in the UK, and she was a nurse. She gave up buying a new car so she could come to South Africa for a week and be with me. And she spent a lot of time with me. It was fantastic.
Mm.
And she provided me about information about the transplant, which was very helpful. And but there's other support. I mean, you know, people flew up to see us. There were people who wrote letters to me regularly. There was a sister who wrote to me, gave me a summary of the exhortation. There were, the kids were phenomenal. They were late teens, early 20s. So they were fantastically supportive, all in different ways, strangely. Well, your kids are all different, aren't they? So
Yeah.
they were fantastically supportive and came to visit and so on. And it just went on and on and on. Somebody came back from an overseas trip and hadn't used all the money that they'd put aside for it. So they gave it to us so that because of all the expenses we had. And it just, we had a 78-year-old crippled woman in Johannesburg who was still working. She wasn't well off at all, but she was a cripple. She took 2 taxis to come and see me. No, 2 buses, sorry, to come and see me, and then took a taxi home, and which was phenomenal. The only hassle, which is worth mentioning, not because of her, but generally speaking, because I was so ill, people must realize that it is very important to keep your visits very short. And of course, she had come such a long way. How could I say to her, I can't handle you anymore? But I do think that's a lesson worth learning, that it's not to stay too long. By all means, visit. Anthony and I felt very strongly about visiting people. It didn't matter whether people were in our own ecclesia or in another ecclesia. If we had access to go and see them, they were our brothers and sisters. If your brother in the flesh is ill in hospital, you go to visit him. Well, these are our brethren and sisters in Christ. So we always went.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
And we benefited it ourselves in that respect. So yes, the help phenomenal.
Yeah. So we're almost out of time. I just got one more question.
Yes.
What advice have you got for other married couples? You know, you've been together 58 years. You've had a 30-year extension on life, Pat.
Yes.
So what advice have you got for other married couples, you know, young starting out or older like yourselves?
Say to me first.
Okay, you go.
Well, what I'd like to say is that for me, marriage involves ups and downs. And the important thing is to persevere, keep at it, be positive, pray, keep at it together, work out your problems together, because it's really, really worth it, because your love grows, it changes in its I don't know, from infatuation to more mature love to, and now together, and being together, I think has been huge in our marriage. And on the same page, because I mean, I might have been visiting brethren and sisters while Anthony's preparing talks or something, but basically we were in the whole thing. Our marriage was centered around God's word and the brethren and sisters. And so, and for me, it's worth it because it gets better and better and better.
Amen.
And I would just briefly add to that when God opens doors, jump in. You know, go through and see what those new opportunities will present to you, because you never know until you've tried something how it's going to work out and whether it will be to a blessing in God's service and to the ecclesias. You've got to try things to find out whether they're going to work or not. And so I would just give that advice. When doors open, go through them.
Together.
Together, yeah. Thank you so much, both of you. You've got an absolutely fascinating story, and we will have a little bit more time over discussion to have a bit more of a chat and maybe find out about your move to Australia and things like that. But in the meantime, we'll stop there. Do you want to say anything?
No, just again, a thank you for sharing with us tonight. It's a real privilege to have you with us, and your wealth of experience is truly inspiring. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So next week we'll have a break. We're going to be doing Family Matters every 2 weeks from now on, as we were doing at the end of last year. So the 1st of March, we have the marriage course. We're going to be talking about that with Mark and Paula Buckler. They're from the UK. That'll be a really interesting one. On the 15th of March, we have Lows and Highs of Marriage with Kurt and Marshall Butler. On the 29th of March, we're going to be talking about addiction with Jeff Richards. And on the 12th of April, we have the guests, John and Hilary Beer are going to be our guests, and they will be talking about a praying family. So we've got some really exciting topics coming up in the next, well, that looks like 8 weeks. So, and then there are more planned as well. I won't tell you too much about that. If you'd like to be reminded of what's coming up and what week it's on, and have any resources come from these sessions, just drop me an email. The email is robert@thinkythings.com. Just put Family Matters in the title bar, and I'll know to send you the emails as well. And if you want to get past recordings, you can pick those up. And again, the link is on the email that I will send out.